Hello, welcome everyone to this evening's Audit Committee. Particular welcome this evening to Helen Watson, who's joining us for an item a little bit later on to talk about children's services. I think everyone knows everyone else, so we'll crack straight on. Apologies, do we have any apologies?
No apologies, but Councillor Newton is online.
Okay, thank you very much. And the minutes of the last meeting. Can I see a show of hands that those are a correct record? Yep, thank you very much. In terms of any matters arising from the minutes, an actions list is in place now. So thank you for doing that. A rolling actions list has been circulated. So there's a few open items which we'll pick up at the next meeting to do with the risk register. And then there's a couple of other items which are still open and in progress. Did anyone have any comments or questions either on the minutes or on the actions? Peter.
So the item that had my name against it was about the MTFP. So I had a session with Graham Adel about the MTFP and how it fits together. So I raised a concern as to whether it was a proper control on the risk or primary risk. I still have concerns. I understand how it works now, but my concern is about how council gets a full view of spending, both revenue and capital spend. So for those who aren't up to speed on this, the MTFP, which we voted through on the February council meeting, talks about spend for this year and possible spend in future years. The bit that's missing, though, is stuff that's not spent in the previous year that gets transferred to the current year as part of a report that comes later in the year. So in order to get a full view of what's coming through, you have to look at the MTFP plus the transfer list, whatever it's called. And I know that there are quarterly reports which show the whole picture, but that's, quite some time after the council had voted it through. So it's tricky to get early in the financial cycle a full view of, certainly on the capital side, what's being spent. But I understand it better now. But it might be. So I've spoken to several colleagues, members, and many of them don't understand how it works either. So perhaps in terms of training, we can try and improve the training so that members understand better how that kind of financial control works.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was certainly something we've mentioned before, isn't it, about training on those accounts, because they're, even to an accountant, they're unusual. So yeah, that's certainly something we could look at. Thank you. Any other comments on the minutes? Mike?
Yes, I see we've got the actions and the officer responsible. We don't seem to have any, whether it's closed or ongoing. So, for example, I particularly asked about whether or not the training of the officers had about the respective roles of officers and members. Could that be provided to members? It doesn't say anything.
So that's been circulated by email. So a full list has been circulated by email to members, and each item it says closed or open, and there's a short comment as to how it's going to be closed or how it was closed.
So that's been done after the publication.
Yeah, because the reasoning being the list is quite long at the moment. Yes. So rather than sort of getting bogged down in these meetings, it's been circulated to members so they get assurance that things aren't being forgotten.
Right.
And then if there are any items for discussion, they can be brought here.
Okay. So I've obviously missed that then.
So if there are any, once you take a look at it, if there are any outstanding things or things that you're not happy with, then obviously let us know and we can have a look at them.
Okay. And when was it circulated?
It was about a week ago, was it, Andrew? Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments on the minutes or questions or the actions? No? Okay, thank you. Any declarations of interest? No? And are there any public or member questions? No. All right, so we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is audit progress update. Pleased to say there is actually some proper good news on the 2021 accounts and audit. And I think the 21-22 audit's also progressing as expected. So over to Helen to start and Graham, perhaps.
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction, because actually, for once, I feel that we are actually giving you some genuine good news on progress. So in terms of 2021, we provided between Graham and ourselves a set of final statements, the final audit results report, and a couple of other documents, including the letter of management representation to the chair and to Graham Ebers this afternoon. We have a meeting with the chair on Friday just to walk her through and confirm that she is content to add her signature to the statement so that we can get them completed and signed on Friday afternoon and then published on the website. So we are finally there, and I think I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has worked so hard to get this done for the end of this week, and being very flexible in terms of timings as well. So that is where we are on 2021. In terms of 21-22, absolutely right, the audit is progressing. We do now have a full draft set of accounts with the group information that wasn't quite there when we issued the progress report, but we now have that. And the work is progressing more or less in line with what we were expecting. The one thing that has probably changed, and looking back at what we put in the progress report, we said that there may be an update from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities before today's meeting, and that actually was issued by the Minister yesterday on the 18th. That is a letter that has gone to local authority leaders, so chief executives, chief financial officers, and I think leaders of each council, as well as the audit firms, on DLUHC's current proposals to address the backlog of audits, which is increasingly significant. I think I won't go into a huge amount of detail here, although happy to ask any questions if members have that, and Graham may wish to comment as well. What I would say is it provides an outline of a way forward, and it sets out the actions that are going to be required by pretty much everybody within the system. So the Financial Reporting Council, the National Audit Office, SIPFA, Local Government Association, the ministry itself, so, and the audit firm. So there's a lot that will need to be thought through, and critically the information that we don't have yet and that will help us all within the system to negotiate our way through is what is the what are the statutory deadlines that are going to be set for each of the different financial years that are involved. So for some audits, there are some audits that go back as far as 2015-16, and then there are some where perhaps it may only be their 22-23 audit that is done. Once we have that information, we'll be in a much better position to assess where we are and what that means for Wokingham Borough Council. But in the meantime, we continue to progress the 21-22 audit as if, I was going to say things are normal. Obviously, they're not, because we are doing it much later than we should ordinarily would, but it is not impacting the work that we are doing currently. It's probably all I really wanted to say, but Graham, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add, and then obviously happy to take comments or questions.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Chair, just to add regarding the information that came out yesterday, it does give a way forward. It also highlighted that, to give context to where we are in terms of 21-22 accounts, there's approximately 27% have been completed. So, you know, it shows just how much of a state the whole national picture is. It gives a way forward, but as Helen said, I think there's a lot of detail it doesn't give about exactly how that will happen. So we will continue working very, very hard on the approach we already have for 21-22, and as soon as that further detail is announced, we'll revise our plans. Looking at the letter, Helen, I've had a chance to read through it again. It says there's going to be a lot more discussion and consultation, and as I read it, the approach might not be finalised until December. It's not quite clear, but it may be we're still waiting for some time for that to be absolutely clarified.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that level of detail that's lacking and how quickly they can get to it. And I think so it is absolutely critical that we continue with the plans that we already have in place.
Yeah, and I would just echo Helen's comments about my thanks to everybody on both EY and in the finance side at WBC for the efforts to push it over the line in terms of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, and we would echo those remarks. So thank you for finally getting there. That's great. Thank you for the report as well, Helen. Do any members have any questions or comments? Mike, yeah.
Thank you, Helen. I've got a couple of comments. I think the last draft of accounts we saw was prior to the cash and cash equivalents adjustment. perhaps you could let us know what the adjustment was in 2021. And I understand from your note, it's actually given risen to a prior year adjustment. So that's the first question. With regard to ongoing audits, I noticed the comment that there won't be a site visit. I was a little bit surprised in post-COVID times because a lot of firms of accountants and auditors actually want to see the assets physically exist. They haven't visited site for several years. That's the second point. And I wonder whether any thought has been given to covering things like transaction testing for the 21-22 accounts at the same time as the 22-23. We're now beyond the year end for 23, just on basis of efficiency. And then finally, there's reference to a group structure of Optalis Holdings. I wonder if you could let us know what that is. So 4 points there, maybe you could cover, please.
Okay, thank you very much for that. In terms of the prior year adjustment, I'm going to now have to dig through some emails so that I try and give you the right value, unless either Graham or Mark has it. So the important thing to note with the prior year adjustment is that it is a classification difference. So it has moved from one line in assets to another line in assets. There's no impact on the bottom line. In terms of the value, sorry, I've just got
a race to find him.
I mean, I'm happy for you to circulate afterwards. I do understand it's just a balance sheet movement. I assume there's no changes between any general reserves and restricted reserves in any way.
No, only other than the one that has previously been reported, which was the reclassification of the dedicated schools reserve deficit that moved from usable to unusable reserves in line with the statutory instrument. But we've discussed that, or we've reported that at each of the committees. The reclassification of short-term investments for the current year was a 95 million reclassification between cash and short-term investments. And the prior year equivalent value was 28 million.
Thank you.
I think that gives you the first one. In terms of the site visit, you're absolutely right. We are looking to do more work face-to-face. There are definite benefits in doing that. As we understand it, to a large extent, council officers are continuing to work from home. What we've actually agreed is that we will keep it under review. I think there will actually be a requirement, not a requirement, but a good reason to be on site. But I think we need to get to a point where probably we've started the work, and then we get to a point where there's a number of queries. You're absolutely right in terms of existence, being out and being able to do that. A number of our team do live in and around Wokingham, so we can cover off existence, in some ways by the fortuitous nature of having members of our team who live in the borough, who can identify that. So it's by no means definitely not a site visit, but we need to make sure that we maximise the benefit of that. And it's probably a little bit too early to say when that would be. Your third point around transaction testing for 21-22 and 22-23, there is merit in that. However, if I go back to what we to the letter that came out yesterday, we don't know when or what we will be auditing in 22-23. So at the moment, within that letter, there are proposals about changing the scope of the audit potentially. So that would be in terms of probably in the areas of where it's been higher risk, higher judgment around valuations of, I would expect, operational property rather than investment property, and changes around pension liability valuations. Again, that's a potential. So there, I think that's mentioned. There are potentially changes in what the code will require and what SIPFA will require as well. So what I don't want to do is to get work started that could become redundant, because that isn't useful for either officers or for ourselves. So it is whilst it would be in some ways efficient, given the level of uncertainty that we're in at the moment, it's not something that I would really want to take forward. Finally, in relation to Optalis, I may need to hand that one over to Graham, Mark, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Helen. So Optalis is the council's arm's length organisation that delivers adult social care services. We actually do a report quarterly to the executive on the financial position. So the last report I was just looking up went in March, which just details where they are financially, gives a little bit of a background. So we can forward you some more information. But in essence, as I say, it's an arm's length organisation that provides us adult social care services.
I think that the issue here, sorry, just flicking back to that, and unfortunately Hannah isn't terribly well today, and that's why she's not here this evening, is that the council and Optalis have changed the structure. And I think, and it was at the very back end of the 21-22 year, and therefore it's a question, what the assessment is kind of, how should it be accounted for in 21-22, when for the very large majority of the year, it was, as it has been in previous years, as we have audited in 19, 20, 2021, etc. It's changed. I want to say it was within the last week of the financial year. And therefore it's kind of, how do we make sure we're accounting for it properly within the statements? Is it because you've only got 1 week of it under the new structure effectively? Mark, I don't know, is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, previously the split was 55 to 45 in Wokenham's favour, with Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. So under that split, which is what we've done for the 2021 accounts, we've had to do a full group consolidation because Optalis were treated as a subsidiary company. As we've moved to 50-50, as Helen says, from March 22, under the SITFA rules, the accounting treatment is no longer full group consolidation. It is known as equity method. So what we're trying to establish with Helen's team is, as she says, because the change is only 1 month of the year, is it material enough to warrant change in the approach of full group consolidation for 21-22?
Yeah, I guess it's a matter of significant control, isn't it? So you might have 50-50 shareholding, but if you have the power to appoint directors, then you might still consolidate. But it sounds as if you'll consolidate for 11 months and then your equity account for 1 month and your equity account in the balance sheet potentially, unless the auditors consider you still have significant control.
Yeah, and that's what we're working through.
Okay, so you'll bring a paper to the committee explaining all that, I see.
Well, we'll certainly cover it off in our audit, in our reporting when we get to it. I think in terms of if we think there's something that is potentially contentious or different, then yes, I think we'd have a discussion with Graham and Mark as to whether a paper in advance would be sensible.
Thank you.
I suppose it would also be maybe wrong of me to move off 21-22 without putting around the one question mark we continue to have, as Graham reminded me earlier today. We don't quite know where Deloitte will be in terms of their audit of the pension fund. So we are continuing to work through all of our work and sticking to that time, working to the timetable agreed. And we will liaise with Deloitte over the summer about their progress.
My apologies, I completely misheard your question. My apologies.
Okay, thank you. I think Mike's happy with that. So thank you for that. Can I just pick up on the existence testing, Helen? So in terms of actually seeing and verifying assets, do you pick a percentage of additions and those happen to be off-site ones, or how do you cover that off?
So some of it is done through the additions testing, but not all of it, because if we just did it purely through additions, it makes it jolly difficult with IT or that sort of equipment. Generally, we select the sample from the assets on the register, and if we cannot physically inspect, then we use different methods. So it might be using Google. I was going to say Google Maps, but that's not quite right. So using Street View to see whether we can actually see the asset. It could be through looking at for schools, for example, making sure that there's obviously still a school in place, that there's a role in place, that there's discussions around that. So it's a different set of methods. But ideally, we would like to, it is easier to demonstrate existence by actually physically verifying it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions from members? No? Okay, thank you very much. And fingers crossed, I look forward to signing the accounts very, very soon. So thank you very much.
Sue, thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is the Director of Children's Services. So you'll remember that in our risk register reviews, the last couple of meetings, we've asked a few questions in this area to gain assurance around risks related to children's services. So I'm very pleased to welcome Helen Watson to join us this evening to help us answer some of those questions. Also bearing in mind, well, a couple of things really. One is that, there's been a lot of activity in this area recently. And also when we've looked at the risk register, we have noticed that the risk level is high and that it's quite a long way away from where the target risk is. So that's another reason why, it's good for us to gain more assurance in this area. So this is really about, it's not necessarily about the strategy of children's services, it's about whether that strategy is being managed appropriately in terms of risk and monitoring and that sort of side of things. So I've asked Helen to just briefly introduce some of the activities that have been happening recently, particularly with regard to the safety valve. Once we've had that brief introduction, we'll sort of think, right, this is where we are now, and we can answer hopefully some questions around that. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm come prepared to speak about other risks as well, but happy to start with SEND and safety valve, which is item 5 on the corporate risk register in terms of outcomes and costs of provision for children with special educational needs. So first of all, it might be helpful if I demystify the wording around safety valve, because the terminology is used heavily, but it's helpful, I think, to put some context around that. So the Safety Valve Programme is a national programme, and it's targeted the local authorities, the 20 local authorities in the country with the highest dedicated school grant deficits, particularly in relation to high needs block, which is largely related to children with special educational needs. We have joined the programme latterly, so there was a wave 1, we came in under wave 2, and we secured an agreement with the Department for Education in January this year. So as I've referenced, this is largely driven by children with special educational needs, and Wokingham, like every other local authority in the country, has seen since the 2014 reforms a significant increase in children who need assistance. So we, through the Safety Valve Programme, have to, and working with our partners, and clearly schools are absolutely significant in this regard, as are health colleagues, because this is whole system working with children. We have to demonstrate through this Safety Valve Programme that we are going to reduce the in-year deficits by the end of the programme. Now, that is in regard of our Safety Valve signed programme, we have to reach a balance by the end of the 28-29 financial year. So this is a programme over a significant period of time, and it is a very challenging programme. We have been very ambitious in what we are hoping to do, and this is very much also about improving services for families with children who have special educational needs. So I hope that has given a bit more context about what safety valve is. And we are monitored very stringently by the Department for Education. So as I've referenced, we came to an agreement with the Department for Education earlier in this calendar year. We are having to submit quarterly, very detailed returns that are a combination of activity data and financial data. And we are in open dialogue with the Department for Education team, which includes a special educational needs advisor in DFE, the Department for Education, and also finance experts. So we have very strong governance and accountability around this whole programme. And that's set down in terms of some of the mitigating controls that we have in the risk register. So just to bring that to life for you, the Chief Executive chairs a weekly, what we're calling a safety valve gold meeting. So, and that's also attended by the Deputy Chief Exec, Section 151. I know we've got Graham Cadle on the call, who also attends, and clearly we've got key individuals. I attend weekly, and our Assistant Director for Education and Special Educational Needs also attends. And we are going through every week the risk register, and we're receiving weekly updates. And clearly the financial outturn of all of this is really, really important. We also, because this is not just about this is about improving SEND provision in Wokingham, linked with our safety valve proposal. We also brought in additional capital funding, and you'll be aware that we have 2 new SEND free schools that will be opening, we hope, in September 26. We're actually depending upon them opening in September 26 in terms of the arrangement that we have with the Department for Education. That has brought significant additional investment into Wokingham, which will really help with some of the challenges that we have around children having to be educated outside of the local authority area. So that has been a really positive development linked with safety valve. We have other governance arrangements. So I chair, as Director of Children's Services, a safety valve board that meets monthly. I also chair a SEND sufficiency board, which has the oversight of the free schools, and this is obviously a cross-council working group, which has key colleagues from property services sitting round the table. Because we're clearly we're very focused on delivering the capital side of the work that we need to put in place. I also chair the local authority, the local area SEND partnership, which has school leaders on it. It has health colleagues on it, because this is all about how we as a system, and I do stress the word system, because health are equal partners in how we work with children with special educational needs, and our schools are absolutely fundamental in this regard in terms of inclusive practices within our mainstream schools, and all that comes with that. So it's a challenging programme. I think we've started well. We will continue on a weekly basis through the Safety Valve Gold grouping to be keeping an absolute grip on the progress that we're making. You won't be surprised that we have a significant number of work streams. So we've got 4 main work streams linked with Safety Valve, with 15 individual projects. And we have a risk register for each of those 15 individual projects, because in totality, they will help us to deliver the safety valve programme. Schools Forum is very much involved in this process. We had a Schools Forum meeting just last week, and school leaders are absolutely signed up to the principles of the safety valve programme. That's school leaders across the piece, mainstream, primary, secondary, as well as special educational needs. And we're doing significant work with our schools at the moment around what we need to be doing with the dedicated schools grant in terms of a 1% block transfer to the high needs block in a future date in the autumn. So I've probably said a great deal there, Rachel, in terms of safety valve and SEND provision. Shall I stop there and see if there are any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really useful introduction. So thank you for that. Comments, questions from members for Helen? David.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you for my clarity on safety valve, but as you say, the language is somewhat unintelligible to a layman. But this also very positive, particularly with the SEND provisions that are being provided with the new schools. Obviously, they're in the planning stage, and as you mentioned, they were dependent upon those. So there is a slight concern there. However, we are currently in the top right for our SEND with the corporate risk register, and we should be in the bottom left. What is the expected trajectory of that risk score over the coming 3 years as those schools are brought forward? And what we expect to see and can we forecast against that?
Thank you. I mean, you're absolutely right. The trajectory needs to shift, and building new schools and bringing them on stream, as well as other units such as SEND resource bases, is going to be key. But it's also about how we intervene earlier, how we support families at the earliest possible stage. We're bringing on stream in the next few months with Addington School some new, early years provision, because we're looking whole system. We're looking at everything that we do. There are challenges at the moment around the number of education, health and care plans that we have. And we're optimistic by bringing on stream over the next months and years, because this is a multi-year programme, that we will be able to intervene earlier and to divert some of those EHCPs, education, health and care plans, by having the right provision at the right time as early as possible in a child's situation. But it is a very complex and ambitious programme. It's within a national context that is very challenging. We are seeing, real impacts for children post-COVID, and that's playing out everywhere in the school system. And it's particularly marked in terms of challenges for children with early years children in particular. So I think we're being very ambitious, but we're confident that we'll do this. But it is a challenging programme, and we'll continue to rework the finances as needed, because there can be small shifts that are quite significant. So we have been reprofiling already since we started the programme a few months ago.
That's useful. I guess this risk particularly is highlighted to me because it is the furthest askew from the where it should be in the register. With others, we have some indication of trajectory, although it's hard to see in these registers. Is there any way we can provide a forecast of where the plans that you've got, which clearly are very detailed and complex, as you say, will move that risk over time? What I'm concerned about is we come back in a year, we're still in the same top right, but actually that's where we plan to be, or actually we should have been halfway there already. It's important to the Audit Committee to track that.
Thank you. I suppose I'd go back to the point I made about this happening over a period of time. So We're aware it's particularly challenging at the moment because we are still seeing a rise in education, health and care plans, while we're developing services at that earlier intervention stage, for example. We're working closely with our schools. We are developing a range of provision. I haven't referenced post-16 provision. We're going to be, again, we got further capital linked to our safety valve proposal around the development of post-16 provision. So I suppose, in summary, we're going to be bringing on stream a range of different initiatives that will have a significant impact over time. And because we are submitting 3 monthly returns to the Department for Education, as you can imagine, we have absolute grip on the projects, the financials that go with the activity, and we're watching for any nuances literally on a weekly basis. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, and the time period for the overall project is that 6 years?
It's we have to come to an in-year balance by the end of 28-29. Yeah.
Mike.
Just to follow up to David's question, if we look at risk 5 on outcomes and costs, we've got 3 of the mitigating actions due to be completed over the next 2 or 3 months. I wondered how they're progressing. Are we going to meet those dates? Do we need to revisit them? Perhaps you could update the committee.
Thank you. I think the challenge that we've got with the mitigating actions, they're encapsulated in a very significant programme. So I think there's a risk of simplification, if I'm being candid, around some of this. So it's quite hard representing the scale of this programme in a few bullet points. But I'm confident that we are making progress. We're in weekly contact actually with our STEND advisor in the Department for Education. We are gripping everything. And if this committee wanted to see the level of, the risk registers that we have for each of the programmes, I'm sure we could share those.
I think it's just a matter of truly reflecting the deadlines in the report, and clearly if some elements of your plan won't meet this, then it needs to be filled into Andrew, etc.
Yeah, just to add to Mike's point, I know this is something the committee's been interested in over the last few meetings, and not just sort of in Helen's area, but more generally. So the next iteration of the risk register that you see at your September meeting will start to have addressed some of those points that have been made, particularly at the last meeting. So just today, Paul and I were going through those particular points. So you will see, picking up Councillor Davis's points, a better sort of clearer trajectory, and also more clarity in terms of the mitigating actions and whether they're on course or behind, and taking perhaps a broader look at them as well, as Helen said there too.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. You said that we are in the bottom 20 of local authorities in terms of the scale of the deficit, and this has been built up over many years. Is this a linear progression, or is it a sudden hockey stick, or how have we been caught napping, or has it just been growing over the years and nothing's been done about it very much?
I think I'd go back to the 2014 SEND reforms,
right.
And I think every single local authority has had some financial impact linked to the reforms. So Safety Valve is one programme. It's a very high level programme for the local authorities that have the most significant deficits. But most other local authorities are in a programme also linked to high needs block and the challenge that we have literally across the country. I don't think we've been caught napping. I think it's very challenging, and there is more at play than just the SEND reforms here. So, we're working closely with our schools to ensure that schools are very inclusive and that the children, only the children who absolutely need to go into special educational needs provision go there. But this is a challenge for the whole country at the moment, not just for Wokingham.
So is it, sorry, I haven't quite understood. So is it an ever increasing demand?
Yes. Yes. And there are statutory requirements. So there are statutory requirements linked to education, health and care plans. And we clearly have to respond appropriately as a local authority. I think it will be hugely beneficial to have the additional provision that we're bringing on stream. In borough, yes, because some of the significant costs are generated by children having to leave the borough to go to independent non-maintained schools, for example. And having our own provision, significantly more provision, will help. We also have a new school opening jointly with Reading Borough Council in September, which will also help. But this is significant. Yeah.
And you say it's a national problem.
Yeah.
So what is creating this ever increasing demand? The population isn't growing spectacularly. So why are we getting better at identifying children with special needs, or is there some other element in the wider environment causing the huge increase in demand?
I think it goes back to the changes, the reforms from 2014, and we've seen a surge over a number of years that's been particularly marked over the last few years. Clearly, we've got to rise as a system to this challenge. But I'm confident. We've got now a very strong partnership with our schools in Wokingham. I didn't reference the Borough Educational Partnership, which we've had in place since January 2022. That is our strategic interface with senior school leaders, and we are strategically working and planning together. I haven't gone into one of the other risks on the risk register, but I'm happy to take any questions in relation to that risk, because we have a challenge around the sufficiency of school places as well, which in many respects is linked to this particular risk that I'm speaking about now. But there are a complex interplay of factors. It's quite difficult to pinpoint one.
Sorry if I'm labouring the point. So you've got an ever-increasing demand, which is getting ever-increasingly expensive to deal with, because inflation presumably plays a part in all this as well. Do we see a plateauing of this demand? Or do we think it's just going to continue to grow? Because at some stage you'll have 100% of the school population under special measures or under special provision if it carries on going.
Okay, perhaps it's worth me outlining some of the key programmes that we're bringing into place. So we need to be, as I've referenced, we need to be supporting parents at an earlier point. At the moment, we don't have an SEN support service at an early stage. We're developing that now, and we're confident that that will help parents at the earliest possible stages to try to divert from the need for an education, health and care plan. So it's at any stage where a child may be struggling with their education, whether that's preschool or when they're in the system. But I think it's really important that we bring that on stream. So we're developing all of that to actually help. But this is complex. children are needing the support that we're giving. So I suppose what the great benefit will be having more provision within the local authority area that clearly will benefit children, so they're not travelling at great expense, whether that's through home to school transport or associated costs.
But that doesn't answer the question I asked. Do we see this demand plateauing or slackening off?
We are anticipating a reducing trajectory of education, health and care plans over the next number of years. Yeah. So we're optimistic that a combination of all of the programmes linked with Safety Valve, combined with the new school building, the SEND resource bases that we're going to bring on stream, the new post-16 provision that we'll be bringing on stream, will have a significant impact, a positive impact on this deficit.
Okay, so one last question then. So we're building 2 new schools. Construction projects have a habit of overspending and not being delivered on time, which isn't going to help us getting to zero balance. So how are we going to make sure those projects are delivered on time and preferably under budget?
We have to work very closely with the Department for Education in this regard, because this is their programme. So we are liaising very much with the Department for Education. There are a number of complexities. We have the Department for Education, for example, will be appointing the academy trusts that will run the 2 new free schools. So that is clearly, in the prerogative of the Department for Education. But we have a grip on this, and we're very much aware of the challenge in building new schools. But we're optimistic that we will meet the deadline of September 26 opening for both schools.
Great.
Okay, thank you. I can see Stephen's been waiting patiently online. Stephen, do you have a question or a comment?
Thanks, Rachel. It wasn't really either. I was just too late finding my button when you called for declarations of interest. I just wanted to declare being foster carer with my wife for Wokingham Borough is on my declarations of interest for the council anyway. But as we're discussing children's services in the broader sense, I just wanted to mention that, so in the interest of disclosure. But I thought it was a very interesting report, so thank you to Helen for that.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Sam and then David.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate the presentation. I think my question was how bad, obviously, we're coming out of COVID now, and how was the demand for this? How was it affecting children in special educational needs? I guess being at home for a couple of years, not necessarily has that made the problem worse? And the other question I have is, from what I understand, the demand for care homes, places for children, is through the roof. Is that also impacting this problem?
Thank you. I think we're seeing the impact of COVID right across the board in children's services, and our schools are very open and frank about what they're seeing and the impact this will have on children for a number of years. We do know that young children, particularly who were born during the lockdowns, have not been well socialised, and their speech and language and other development has been affected. And we think that is showing now in rising need that's coming to the fore in the early years. So we've seen an increase in requests for education, health and care plans for very young children. And we think that a large part of that is linked with the pandemic. In terms of other challenges, you referenced placements for children. We are seeing increased complexity of need, and really significant increased complexity, to the point where we're very challenged on occasions to actually find a single placement for a child with very complex needs anywhere in the country. Now, positively, we have been developing our own. We're developing now our own in-house residential provision for children, and we hope to have that on stream in the next, by the end of the calendar year, ideally. And there has been a report to executive about that. So we think developing our own provision will assist with the very significant rising costs that we're seeing, as well as the challenge of having nowhere sometimes for children to be placed. So it is a very complex picture. And I suppose that links to the safeguarding risk on the risk register. And I think, we're doing, we're responding proactively and positively with all due regard to the risks. Clearly, we will be registering with Ofsted as the regulator, the new provision as we bring it on stream. But we're very positive about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and as a father of a 4 and a 7-year-old, I can definitely see the changes that COVID impacts have been around them and their friends. This is rather careful because it's self-selecting that people don't talk to their counsellor about things that have gone well. But with regards to EHCP particularly, and trying to get the support from the council, a number of people, friends of mine and obviously constituents, have described it as somewhat of a battle at times. They've ultimately got to the outcomes they need, or they felt they need for the children, but they've had to go through endless appeals, challenges to the decisions, and involving councillors at times to do so. Again, I would accept there's going to be any number of others who are going through a much smoother process, so these are self-selecting is the problem. Do you accept that there sometimes are these challenges that people are not given the outcomes they require? And is there any kind of policy noting that this is officially or unofficially, noting this is a high-cost part of what the council does to try and challenge people out of the process, to make it harder for people to get into the process and to get in the ECP?
I mean, this is a very complex legal process that we're talking about here. And I'm very mindful of the statutory requirements that we carry as a local authority in this regard. It is challenging, and I see complaints. I get many in my inbox. I think we have challenges around the workforce, and this links back to another risk in the corporate risk register. For example, the availability of educational psychologists is a national challenge. It's a challenge for Wokingham, but it's also a national challenge. And clearly, there can be delays sometimes in educational health and care plans being undertaken within the required timescale because of the challenge of having sufficiency around the numbers of educational psychologists, for example. We've worked very hard to address that, and we're very proactively trying to bring down the time it takes for a family to have an education, health and care plan issued. But it is very challenging, and we have limited resource, whether it's across children's services or with our health partners in terms of the availability of appropriate therapeutic provision. But I think we're working very hard as a local area SEND partnership, which involves health colleagues as well, to try to mitigate the challenge and improve services, which is very much what our involvement in Safety Valve is about.
Any other questions for Helen? Okay, I think we'll bring that to a close there. Thank you very much, Helen, for joining us this evening. Oh, go on then, Mike.
You mentioned that you have 15 projects and each one of those has a risk assessment. You'd offer them that we could see those if we wished. So at the moment we get the corporate risk register, and it's a one-page summary with an awful lot of information on that one page. Do you have similar for all 15 of your projects?
We do, and we scrutinise it weekly at our gold meeting chaired by the chief executive. And in the safety valve board that I chair, we spend much of the meeting focusing in detail on each of the programmes. So yes, I would be happy to share the nuances of the risk register for each of the projects. And I think Andrew referenced that earlier. Yeah.
So you review them every week. Are they updated every week? Because otherwise it's just going to be sort of a snapshot in time, isn't it?
Well, the safety valve programme board that I chair meets monthly. And the gold meeting is weekly. So if we see any shift on a weekly basis, we will obviously amend the risk register. But the monthly programme board is a very detailed, 2 to 3 hour meeting with all of the leads for each of the individual programmes.
So I would personally like to see a sample or a set, please.
Okay, we'll get those circulated around to members. Thank you. All right, well, thank you very much, Helen, for joining us. I'm sure it won't be the last time the Audit Committee see you to talk about this, but thank you for your time. Okay.
Thank you.
And moving on to risk management policy and guidance as the next item. So there's a slight error in the papers that were published because the recommendation isn't quite correct. So you've got a revised recommendation on the paper sheets. So since we changed the terms of reference and that was all agreed, we're no longer responsible for recommending the policy. So you'll see the new recommendation is considering the adequacy and effectiveness of the policy. So Paul, are you going to take us through this and introduce this? Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Essentially, we have conducted an annual review of the policy and guidance. Those of you who've been on the committee for some time will recognise it. For those of you who are new, I'm just going to sort of highlight the main purposes of those. The review has essentially found that the policy and guidance is sound. We've utilised the Treasury, Her Majesty's Treasury Orange Book on risk management, which is a code of practice for risk management in the public sector. We found essentially what I describe as minor enhancements, particularly around clarity and consistency throughout the two documents. So the first one is the risk management policy, which sets out our strategic objectives of risk management and describes how we deliver that in terms of roles and responsibilities of both members and officers. The guidance is the more detailed operational application of those principles set out in the policy. Essentially, there's as I said, it's the same sort of approach in terms of being consistent, looking at a more holistic approach and emphasising collaboration. But I'm happy to take any detailed questions on the changes. I've tracked all the changes so that you can compare and see where they are, and really happy to take any questions or comments.
Questions or comments? Right, David first, please, and then Mike.
Can I say firstly, absolute pleasure to review this document. Not because I like this sort of thing, but because the way it was tracked was really easy to understand and follow, and that's really helpful, so thank you. The only point I had, which is rather picky, but we're getting this as best we can. I noted at the very start we changed the level tier 2 reports to directors, I think, which is the new nomenclature we're using internally. But then as we go to the report, we refer to members, obviously ourselves, and managers as requiring some of the risk training, and all of a sudden directors are forgotten. I was wondering, is there any work, do we need to be more consistent in that, because directors are or are directors managers and therefore anything down? Like I say, very picky, but yeah.
As the author of the guidance, I was including directors as in the role of managers, but I can sort of look at clarify. That's the intent, yeah, it is.
Okay, Mike, and then Peter.
In light of the change recommendation, does that mean that on page 63, the overview of risk management framework, where the audit committee is in the middle column of approval, are we in the wrong place?
Yes, good spot. Yes, thank you.
Because I did wonder about that last night. One of the things that came across to me, there's lots of, the director does this, the assistant director does that. What I'm interested in is okay, so risk is identified, it's assessed in terms of its likelihood and its impact. I don't see in here any verification process or checking or challenging process of that assessment. And it seems to be down to the people who identify the risk to mark their own homework. And that's a bit worrying, because we have a number of risks that we see just in the corporate risk register where the mitigation actions don't seem to be having much effect. And I assume that must be repeated in the various directorate risk registers.
Okay. So yeah, the process of challenge happens at every sort of level of the process. So
it's not.
Yes.
Yeah. How that is. We do. Sorry. We do lots and lots of things. You know, the overview and scrutiny committee challenges the executive decisions. The audit committee is here to do a whole variety of checks and balances. I don't see the checks and balances reflected in this guidance anywhere. Just it seems to read to me like people are marking their own homework.
Okay. I think I can assure you that there is challenge built into the process. I think I might need to go back and have a look in the guidance where we can reflect that action there. So if it's helpful, I'll just talk about that process of challenging how that works. So I'll talk about corporate risk because that's probably easiest for you. So the risk management group is a collection of risk management champions across the organisation that represent their directorates, and they work with their directorate leadership teams to identify risk, or other officers in their directorate can escalate risk directly to them. They then, once they've identified those risks and done those assessments, they bring those to the risk management group, and the risk management group have a discussion and challenge and ask challenging questions about the risk assessments, the level of controls, whether those controls are effective and operating, and then looks at the mitigating actions and how they're done. Once the risk management group have had their challenge of the risk register and changes and those challenges, those are presented to the corporate leadership team, and the corporate leadership team also challenge those risks and do those. And there's a level of challenge there, and then it will come to this committee, and you obviously challenge the assessment and rating of those risks. So that's how the challenge process operates in practice. I think I might need to go back and look at the guidance to make sure that's reflected in there and that everybody understands that's the process, but that's how the challenge process operates.
I'm sort of minded to reflect now, Woking has gone bust spectacularly, mainly due to its unwise investment process. And you're thinking, how did that not get flagged up somewhere in the risk identification and management process before it got so badly out of hand?
Can I come in on that? So I think that's something we've touched on before in terms of high-profile failures, and there's always lots of different reasons why these things happen. And I mean, I think in terms of the wording, it might just be worth being really explicit using the word challenge. Actually, I mean, I think you've got some really good lists of what the different groups and people are responsible for, but perhaps it's just a case of adding that word in just to make it really clear. It's not just about reviewing and sharing; it's also about challenging. Before I go on to others, just while we're talking about those lists, the only point I had was whether for the risk management group, I think it would be that group that would be most appropriate, whether we could add in actually to consider feedback from the audit committee. Because I know that obviously it's not our risk register, we're only reviewing it and sort of contributing to it, but I just didn't feel that was adequately reflected, because we do look at it most meetings and we do provide, we do challenge it and we do it. So just perhaps a line in there just to say, consider that feedback and from the audit committee to make that clear. Right, I think I've got Peter, then I'll take Stephen online and then David and then Mike. Oh, sure, yeah, on that point, yeah.
It was just when you're describing the ADs and the directors' roles, I mean, they're clearly there highlighting they're responsible for managing the risks beneath them. So that felt like the check and balance that Mike was looking for, but that would be my perspective.
Just under Appendix 2, example of risk categories, often they'll have in risk management reputational risk. There's no line there saying reputational risk. 64, sorry. And it does actually mention it in the impact scores.
Yes.
Talks about impact on the council's reputation, but there's nothing within. I don't know these are examples, but it might be useful to have reputational risk impact, the Gerald Ratner sort of thing. What else did I have?
Yeah, I'm happy to include that.
And the impact scores section, and again, I know these are kind of, helpful descriptions, but there's no mention that I could see of impact on residents. There's impact on services, which I suppose is something we provide to residents, but it might be nice if residents get a call out somewhere in there. If you can. I think that was all I had.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that. I suppose it does talk about objectives, and obviously the objectives of the council are all about the residents. So you could argue it's covered, but yeah, perhaps it'd be nice to just be more explicit on that one. Yeah. Sorry, Stephen, next online.
Thank you. I've got a couple of points, if I may, please, Rachel. Firstly, it was to do with the Audit Committee update document. I'm taking that this is sort of like the new best practice guidance is how I'm reading that, and I think that's why it's been circulated. And I just wondered if it's be possible for whoever's responsible for this to sort of do a review of our audit committee so that we can see what they believe our level of compliance with this is, and if there are any gaps or things that we're not doing or areas that we should be looking to improve, because I think obviously going against best practice should be what we're trying to achieve. And I just wonder if that's possible or whether it's already done. Being new, it may be something that is already covered off and I'm not aware of, but I just thought that might be something that would be constructive. And the second,
Stephen, could I just clarify on that? Do you mean, are you referring to something within the policy and guidance, or?
It was within the update document that was circulated, which is about effective, how an audit committee can be effective.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes.
So I was just wondering how compliant we are against those standards.
Yeah. Shall I start with that, and then I'm sure officers will help. I mean, there are a number of ways that we review our own performance, and we have done during the year, and that comes up in a number of the reports that produces, including ones that go through to council. So, and we do have improvement actions that we are working on. For example, a second independent member, for example. So I don't know if officers want to add anything on that point.
There's a annual review of the audit committee effectiveness that we conduct in February. So last February we brought a report of that assessment and created a action plan that demonstrates how we're going to progress against that SIP for code, and we intend to bring an update and do the same thing in February this year. So that's how we would demonstrate that.
Thank you. That's useful. So appreciate that. If I can come on to my second point then, please. This was to do with the ERM document. I think it's building a little bit on what Mike has already mentioned. And it could be that I'm just misreading some of this and not fully understanding it. So my point is that we want to try and avoid the spectacular blow-ups that we've seen, and we want to try and catch that early. And it seemed to me that there's a good process of calling this out within the officers and within the leadership. And I can see that the executive member is alerted to particular risks within their area of responsibility. My concern with that is the responsibility not one of the body corporate as council rather than the executive solely? And therefore, I was wondering whether there should be, rather than we read about it in the audit report after this has all happened, and we see that it went spectacularly wrong, and we can praise ourselves for then finding out about it afterwards. If a significant risk is raised to an executive member, I'm just wondering if that could be specifically pointed out to the relevant overview and scrutiny committee, and also brought to our attention, so that we can see that it has been logged and it has been looked at and addressed. It's not just sitting with the appropriate executive member. We need to have a bit more check and balance, is what I was thinking, rather than hoping that they will deal with it. It'd be nice to have some assurance that it has been dealt with.
Yeah, so I'll have a go at this and then bring Paul in. So firstly, yeah, we can certainly look at Councillor Newton's suggestion there. What I was going to also highlight is that in February, at your meeting there, we're going to bring an assurance map or assurance framework to you, and that looks at the whole system of assurance in a local authority. The LGA is just consulting at the moment on a draft model of a framework, and it shows sort of how the different components, obviously audit committees, but standards committees, the executive council itself, the officer corps, that whole the public as an important body scrutinising the work of the council. It shows how all of that fits together. And I think that perhaps in part is what Councillor Newton is talking about. And I think that's an opportunity for the committee later on in this year to sort of consider those different sources of assurance and get a feel for how well or otherwise those different parts of the corporate body are working.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that does help me a lot, to be honest. I think my concern is that I'm assuming, maybe wrongly, that where these other councils have had major problems, that it may well have been flagged, but wasn't adequately addressed. And I'm just trying to make sure that we don't end up with it sitting with somebody trying to do something and the rest of us aren't aware, and it needs more input and more help and more support or more action. That's what I'm trying to get to, is where we work more collectively rather than in isolation, I suppose. But we can certainly look at it in February, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Okay,
Thank you.
I've got, so is it particularly on that? Yeah, go on then, Dave, and then I'll come to Mike.
Yeah, so I mean, the point of the risk management structure is to provide the route for escalation and management of risk, which I'm confident it does. It is post facto. That's the very nature of risk reporting, although the management log is going to be in real time. I mean, that's the very point of the executive member, to manage and execute. This is why decisions that come to council are not binding, as we found out earlier this year, because the executive member is responsible for enacting the action. Now, we can take action if they don't manage it properly, but I don't think there is a risk. I don't think there's a risk with our risk management process of us turning out like Woking, because the amount of time, that nothing an exec member could do could cause that much damage before it would then go through the ADs, the Ds, into audit committee and into overview and security already, as I understand it. So I don't think there's any change required, but I agree it is a thing we need to be careful of.
Thank you, David. And Mike Drake.
And I think my point's rather similar to Stephen's as well. I get the idea, particularly at the beginning of the document, that the council used to be quite risk averse. It seemed to have hinted on it in a couple of paragraphs. And as we adopt more risks for could be good reason, better services, better return on the investments we make, for example. And I apologise, I'm not a councillor, so I don't attend the council meetings. But when a more risky project is proposed, presented, does the proposer say this is a more risky project? So you're highlighting the risk earlier in the process. And when they do that, do they present mitigating actions, just as we do at the corporate risk register, so that it's more upfront? Yes, this is good for the council, but it's more risky, and this is how we mitigate it. And I apologise if that's already done, but it seems fairly obvious, straightforward to me. So I don't know what happens in the meetings. There we are, David. What happens in the meetings?
Just to say a little bit from an officer perspective on that, Mike. So again, there's a whole system in place there. It's not about one individual member, even an executive member. So, for example, Graham Ebers is a Section 151 officer, and indeed his deputy, Graham Cadle, who's on the call today. They have got statutory duties in terms of advising council around any high risk financial issues or decisions that executive may be minded to make or council would be minded to make. Myself as the monitoring officer have statutory duties around illegality. So if there was something that was obviously illegal, then I've got a statutory duty to report to council there. So there's just from the officer perspective, there's two sort of checks and balances in terms of not allowing one individual, if you like, to go rogue.
Are those risks though presented to the councillors who are providing the overview and the review?
I think you're probably talking there about the quality of officer reports.
Yes, but risks highlighted early in a project so that you don't get a Woking problem or whatever. So in other words, it's earlier in the process, which is the Stephen was raising.
Yeah, I would say, and I'm sure members around this table would have maybe different views. I'd say risks are included and referred to in executive reports, but it may be something that the audit committee wishes to consider in terms of strengthening the section, or actually having an explicit section on risk in an executive decision making report. That might be something for the committee to consider and recommend. And it is one of the, under the new terms of reference, it is within your gift as an audit committee to recommend to executive any enhancements in terms of the overall sort of control environment, and that may be one.
Yeah, I mean, it might be something we look at in terms of the format of cover papers, for example, because at the moment there isn't an explicit risk section, is there? I mean, but there are other sections which do cover off particular risks. So it's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Mike Smith now.
Thank you. Stephen's point and also Mike's point were interesting, because I was actually thinking there doesn't seem to be a role for a whistleblower in any of this policy. I don't know whether there needs to be. It sort of comes back to my concern about challenging, etc.
Well, I'm not sure it's necessarily directly relevant in there, but the council does have a whistleblowing policy. It's published on the website, and we do get people coming to us with concerns that we would follow up through that whistleblowing policy. So, and again, just to sort of reiterate my point, for me it's about the whole system of controls, not just the risk, what you do in risk management, but whistleblowing, fraud policies, that whole system working well together and not having any weak spots.
That's why I did wonder whether under 515 just staff, whether it needs to mention the ability of staff to raise issues if they don't, outside of their line management.
I can see Graham Cadle's got his hand up. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The reference to Woking, but to some of the other Slough, etc., on the financial side, and to Andrew's point about the whole system, one of the things, or two of the things for Woking that I suppose candidly I'm not sure how it wasn't picked up in hindsight, was in their Treasury Management report, the level of borrowing. So our level of borrowing is about 360 million. I think theirs was 2.4 billion, if I remember. And they had a requirement for something like 50 million of interest off the back of those investments. Now, that would in this council have been picked up both in the Treasury Management strategy, where we have clear indicators about the level of borrowing, the level of return, but also in our revenue monitoring reports, where we show where our budget is, we're not continuing overspend. So it's just more from a financial perspective, but I guess backing up Andrew's comment about there's a number of components that need to be taken into place: the financial position, the risk management, the governance, whistleblowing, all those things that come together.
Thank you, Graham. Any other points from anyone? Sam?
Yeah, and just sort of echoing what some of others said today, I think one thing I'm keen to see is, what maybe the council, if there's something you conclude in this report around just something around what can be done to mitigate what in the corporate world you call single point of failure. So, you know, where you often get there's situations in the business world where one individual and organisation makes one bad decision, it can lead to the demise of the entire company. So it'd be great to see something what's done to mitigate that. And the other question is more just around. It'd be great to see something around what could be done to mitigate risk with regards to segregation of duties with regards to any individuals that might be responsible for key procurement activities of services or goods, anything which could be deemed a risk, you know, to stop things happening which may be, you know, favouring particular firms or service providers, etc., etc., etc. So just seeing how or what the council does to mitigate that as well would be great to see.
Yeah, I think those things are within that wider governance framework. So the financial regulations part of the constitution, the contract and procurement regulations part of the constitution. So I think it might be useful in the guidance to reference those out so that we know where it is without duplicating it.
I guess it's about identifying a risk or noting the risk before it actually happens. So it's not when you receive a Treasury report, when you receive that's after the event. It's almost too late. You're really mitigating something's happening. It's having a process before it actually happens. So you might accept that risk. This is what the mitigation, but it's knowing what that risk is in advance before you then do a corporate transaction or whatever.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously, this committee used to review this Treasury management strategy and outturn reports, and it no longer does. And it's something I've raised with the head of internal audit, just for her to consider as part of her audits for this year, as to whether that does still get enough scrutiny. Obviously, it goes to executive and, you know, council, etc. But it's something that's on her radar to have a look at as well, just on that particular point around Treasury. Any other points or questions? Okay, I just noticed one other spot where it says that the audit committee is approving the report, so the policy. So it's at top of page 37.
I think there are others as well.
Yeah,
so probably need to read through.
Any others? That would be great. I realise it's quite a late change, so thank you. Okay, all right. If there's no other comments or questions, thank you very much, Paul, for that. So the last main item we have this evening is the CIRO. Is that how you say it? CIRO annual report. So I'll pass over to Andrew for this one.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is all about information risk, and we've got a real evening of risk this evening, I think. So we're just going to end talking about the information risk that the council is facing. Now, it's good practice to have a CIRO annual report. This is the first time that it's been to the audit committee, and again, in terms of your new terms of reference, I think it's an example of having a broader look at the things that are going on in the council. So this is a bit of an opportunity for a slightly deeper dive into those two corporate risks that you've seen for the last few meetings. So it's risk number 8, which is the cyber security risk, and it's risk number 19, which is around information governance and compliance. So just to say a little bit about the report itself, and what you're being asked here is you're recommended to discuss and note the content of this report. So that's the purpose of bringing it to you this evening. And if I could just refer you to the sections in the report. So section 2, where the meat of the report starts, it talks about roles and responsibilities for all things information governance, and you'll see some statutory roles that we've got in there. You'll see also the importance of CLT as the key officer body in terms of their attention that they pay to both risk number 8 and risk number 19. Just as an example of that, CLT a few months ago had a briefing session from our cyber consultants, a half-day session on cyber risk, and again just raising awareness, bringing it to sort of full prominence of that top officer team. Section 3 talks about risk management and also talks about the role of internal audit, and internal audit are just about to report internally on information governance, and I'm sure Catherine will be coming to this meeting in the future to give you some headlines from what the internal audit team found around the information governance risk. Then section 4 talks about breaches. So this is the 2022-23 report. One of the council's key corporate performance indicators is the number of breaches that we are required to report to the Information Commissioner, which is a sort of regulatory body for all things information governance. We had one reportable breach in 22-23. It was, whilst it was a reportable breach and we reported it immediately, it was about some physical information that was lost, but it was subsequently found very quickly. The Information Commissioner was very complimentary in terms of the speed with which we reported, but happy to take no further action in terms of that particular breach. What you'll also see in the report in that section, though, is that we very much encourage an internal reporting culture. You'll see that we had over 100, I think it was, reports internally, which, again, it's one of the areas for improvement during the year, but we want to use that internal reporting regime to help us learn, to target training, to close any gaps, any loopholes that we've got that would lead us to those more significant breaches that would be reportable to the ICO. So I did want to stress that particular point around breaches. Section 5 talks about IT security and cyber. Obviously, you'll understand as a public meeting, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to go into too much detail in that area, but I can assure you that we've got lots of initiatives, lots of controls in place around IT security and cyber itself. Section 6 talks about access to information. So typically this would be through the submission of freedom of information requests, or what are called subject access requests. We have over 1,000 requests for information from us each year. Again, we've got a corporate performance target on our response times to freedom of information requests, and that's 90%. And we were, just very shy of it last year, 89.4%. But in the first quarter of this year, we've got over 90%. And again, that's an important metric to us in terms of openness and transparency with the public and being responsive to those requests when they come in, and certainly comparative to other authorities, I think we're doing well in that particular area, and it's something that we've worked on a lot over the last 12 months. Another thing that we're doing, and today is the day that the new website went live, is we're looking at how we can be even more open and transparent with the information that we publish. So in that perfect world, no one would ever need to submit a freedom of information request to us because it would be all there on the website. So again, we're looking at how we can improve in that area. The subject access requests is not as good as freedom of information. But again, it's an area that we've made some improvements in. You'll see a table at the foot of page 81, which gives you some more details in terms of how we're performing there. Subject access requests typically tend to be much more complex than freedom of information requests. Quite often it can be an individual asking for all the information that the council holds on them. And dependent on the interactions that an individual's had with the council, they can be really complex, very time consuming to gather all that information. That is an area, particularly in children's services, that we're looking to see how we can improve that and how perhaps we can use different means of providing the information without going through that formal subject access request process. And then section 7 towards the end talks about the policy framework that we've got in place and the different sources of assurance that we're looking at, including internal audit. And again, as I say, you'll get some more information from Catherine on that particular aspect. So just to end, just to refer you to paragraph 1.5, which is the sort of looking ahead and the things that we've got in train for 23-24. Very happy to take questions, but also on the basis that this is the first time that we've reported in this format, very keen to sort of take your views and comments in terms of how we could improve this report and the sorts of things that you might have expected to see that you're not seeing tonight, and we can bring those to you in a future meeting and certainly into the next annual report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's really it's a useful review for us, I think, of the activities in this area. Questions from members? I've got Peter and then Mike. Thanks.
It mentions GDPR, and part of GDPR, or certainly part of some of the regulations, is the right to be forgotten, which I couldn't see mentioned here at all. Is that all bundled in subject to access requests, or is it separate? Is it dealt separately?
It's true, it's not in this report, but I can provide information to the committee in terms of how many of those types of requests that we've had. We do get them, but I think it's probably just a handful that we're talking about, but happy to provide that information to the committee.
Yeah, I think it should form just a small section in here, just so that we're covering it, so that people know that there's a right to be forgotten and it's being looked after. I think there was just one typo on page 80 that I noticed. Being picky.
Only one.
Only one. I'll just prove I actually read it. It's 6.5. It says the bulk of residents coming from the media. It should say the bulk of requests coming from the media.
Yes, good spot.
Sorry.
I shall amend that.
That's all I have.
Okay. Who else had a question? I was Mike, sorry. Drake first, sorry. Mike Drake then, and then Mike Smith. Yeah.
Too many Mikes as usual. I thought for a first go at the report, it was very good, Andrew. So it was excellent, I thought. On some of the KPI data you've presented, do we have any information with regard to sort of similar peer group councils? On the face of it, most of it looks very good, but it's difficult to know how we do against.
A similar sort of question linked to that. On the FOI data, where you've got requests received, does that exclude ones where it would take you too much time to actually complete them? Because I know if they're really onerous, you can actually refuse them. So are they included or not?
We can if it's excessive, except I don't believe, but I'll need to check this for the record, we have refused any. So again, in the sort of spirit of openness and transparency, we have done our utmost to make sure we respond to all the requests that we've got. If I take Mike's point about benchmarking information, again, I think that's really important. It's something I need to do. It's something that I'd like to provide some initial information to the committee, hopefully for the next meeting, or we can do it as part of the actions from tonight. But certainly when we get to the next annual report, I'll make sure that we've got more comprehensive benchmarking so you get a better picture of how Wokingham is doing compared to its closest neighbours, let's say, or its similar authorities.
Thank you. That'd be really useful, I think. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. On the point about refusals, it might be worth adding that in as a point, because it's obviously a decision that's been taken. And obviously you weigh that up against the staff time of actually doing it. But if that's a sort of strategy, then it's worth putting it in. Mike?
Yes, I think it's an excellent first attempt. That sounds a bit disparaging, but no, I found it quite an interesting report. But two points. One of my concerns at the last audit committee meeting when we were talking about the forward work programme of the internal audit team was they have, at the moment, no intention of doing an audit on cybersecurity in 24-25. Yet this report makes it quite clear how serious an impact the loss of IT Services Council could be. And it is massive, particularly how much work is done online. So I'm slightly surprised by that. And I would, the answer we got when I challenged it was, oh, well, things can be changed. But I'd like something a bit more certain than that. And under 4.5, where you list the breakdown of the instances of data breaches, I'd kind of like a bit more information. That sort of the low, medium, high, etc. is interesting, but were they electronic data breaches? Were they hard copy data breaches? Were they some sort of system errors? I mean, recently we had a consultation evaluation which happened to include all the details of the consultees, which I would imagine that would be a high level.
Yes, that sort of thing would be on this list. I think what I tried to say or convey in my introduction is that this needs to be developed. I think it would be really helpful to the committee, but also for officers to get that full breakdown of the different, what those represent. But it is things like you referred to there, Mike, but also things like sending an email to the wrong address, for example. So at the moment, we've got about a dozen categories that sort of break down those different ones, and we'll make sure next time that we bring that more detailed information. Yeah.
I would just say on the audit point as well, I know we've covered it before, but if you look at the audit plan over a period of 3 years, cyber security is audited 2 out of those 3 years. It was audited last year, it's going to be audited this year, and it's not. So, but yeah, take the point. I think there's only one risk that's covered off in every one of the 3 years, which is the financial one. Okay, other points? Yes, David.
Thank you very much. So again, actually, no, rubbish report, just to go, no, excellent report. You mentioned about the breach reporting being immediately. Great word. How quickly was immediately? I know 72 hours we're obliged to.
Oh, that one was within 24 hours, probably less.
Great, perfect. And then also, you also talked about fostering self-reporting for ICO. Again, best practice. However, we're a few years beyond lost USB sticks causing a problem because most people are locked down. But let's hypothetically a lost USB stick that no one's ever going to know about. I've encountered environments where my clients have had, they've said, whatever you've lost, don't worry, we're not going to sack you, essentially, versus others which are much more draconian. And in the first instance, it does encourage reporting, but it fosters a lack of care and also, therefore, more breaches. And the second one fosters a lack of reporting. How do we foster that internal reporting culture?
Yeah, you're right. It's a balance, isn't it? There's sort of that there are, we want to encourage the reporting. Having said that, I'm aware that during last year there were some disciplinary issues that related to those breaches. So it's not quite perhaps the way that you portrayed it. That it's so. Yeah, we would absolutely, if it was a pattern of conduct, that would be picked up through a disciplinary process. If it was of such significance, well, obviously, if it was reportable to the ICO, that would be significant, but there may be other things within those categories as well that we would need to look at from a conduct point of view.
I think that pattern of behaviour is exactly the right balance, personally. Yeah, lose your laptop once, don't sack them for that.
Okay, I've got Stephen online.
Thank you. Just to echo what others have said, I thought it was a good report, very interesting, and thank you for that. If I can refer you to the table on bottom of page 80, I don't want in any way my comments to sort of seem dismissive of the efforts of people, but I couldn't help but notice that the number of requests received had gone down, and that may have helped raise the percentage of achievement, but also noticed that the number of hours involved had gone down. And I just wondered two things. Have we reduced the resource in that team? Was it maybe diverted to some of the other areas to get those numbers better? And my concern primarily is if the number of requests were to go up again, would we be able to respond to that, or would the percentage go down? So what I'm trying to understand, I suppose, Andrew, is it management and staff actions that have done this, driven the benefit, and it's going to be a continual uptick, or is it just the number of requests going down helped us out, I suppose? But I don't want to diminish the effort involved to the people, because I know that it's significant with these things.
No, some really good points there. I mean, I would say that the resource is pretty much the same. It sits within legal services. So there hasn't been a significant change there. The resources don't just look, though, at FOI, so they look at subject access requests and the whole sort of information governance space as well. The point about the numbers of FOIs going down, as it shows in that table from the previous year to 22-23, I mean, there's a small decrease, I accept, and less hours spent on them. Now, maybe, and I can't say this definitively, and there's a bit of guesswork here, but maybe it's because we're getting better at what we publish on our website, and that's helped in terms of reduce the numbers of requests. I don't think there's necessarily a direct correlation there, but I think that might have helped in this instance. The team, though, also in terms of that performance, they've done a lot of work internally in terms of early alerts to assistant directors and directors, where FOI requests are just about to go over time. So we've done a lot internally in terms of the controls that we're putting in place to try and improve that performance. It's one of those areas, it's not totally within our gift in terms of the demand and how many requests come in. But as I say, we're doing our utmost to try to stick within that 90%, which is the ICO's recommended best practice. But as I say, in picking up Mike's point, we'll bring some benchmarking information. I'll show you how other local authorities are performing on there. But what I've seen, you're talking about 50, 60% type performance from quite a few authorities around FOI responses.
Thank you. Would it be appropriate to pass back our thanks to the teams for these improvements, Rachel, even if that's possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Please do that, Andrew. Yeah. Any other comments or questions for anyone? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that report. And the last item we have is the forward programme. Does anyone have any comments on the forward programme? I noticed we do seem to have quite a lot in the November meeting and slightly less in the September meeting. So is there any chance that any of the November items could be moved forward to the September? Probably not, but yeah, probably.
But perhaps we could have a look at the annual governance statement sort of update.
Yeah.
We need to have a think about that, but that's a possibility. We can move forward.
Okay. Mike?
I assume your fourth point on the Auditor's Annual Report 2021 for our next meeting would have been signed this month from what I hear. So that will.
Oh yeah, so there won't will we need a report on that? We won't, will we?
Unless that's
should they do a
summary?
Optimistically. Well, that's a good point. That's a very good point. The 2021 Auditor's Report we've already reviewed at the last meeting, didn't we? And will be signed by then.
So it might be a very brief agenda.
Okay. Mike Smith.
Having now read the action tracker document, which I missed, the very last point was I asked for an additional column on this report so that we knew what we were doing, whether we were considering, receiving, noting, approving, whatever. Is that going to happen the next time round? Because it does say action closed.
Yeah, so I might have misinterpreted that point, Mike. We'll have a look at it. I think I took it that it was about being clear what the action was, which is the first column. But I think perhaps you was talking about something different.
But where is, for example, what are we doing? Noting it, we receiving it, commenting on it.
Yeah, I mean, if the majority of them are now for noting or reviewing or receiving, there's very few sort of decisions or approvals that we make now. So is that okay? Yeah. You happy with that? Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, we understand that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think it's always clear in the actual recommendation on the paper, isn't it, what we're doing? So hopefully, anyway. Okay. Any other points on the forward programme? Oh, Mike, you got your microphone on, but yeah. Okay. All right. I think we've come to an end. So thank you very much, everyone, for all of your input this evening, and thanks for all the reports from officers. Enjoy the rest of your evening.